participating in a new horror anthology that is being edited by Dan Alatorre. This will be the fourth anthology in the Box Under the Bed series, and I have participated in a previous two. The last one I was involved in was called Nightmareland, and I'm taking this opportunity to read you a short extract from one of my stories called the Siren Witch. October 1884. The woman who stood alongside the isolated dock was not beautiful. Her nose was slightly too hooked, her body marginally too large-boned, and her dark eyes fractionally too almond-shaped to meet the traditional requirements of beauty. Her long and curling dark hair, overly ample bosom, and pouting mouth gave a suggestion of wanton sexuality to her still figure, which rose up out of the mist like the proud prow of a ship. Her haunting voice floated across the water as she sang of love lost and found. "Oi, look at that," said Richard, pointing in the direction of the buxom figure. The distance between their small fishing vessel in the middle of the delta and the woman on the shore was sufficiently far for the two unsophisticated fishermen to miss the cat-like shine of her eyes in the grey dankness and the satisfied curl of her lips. The notes of her pure voice caressed them, encircling them in its swirling and enchanting embrace, and compelling them to come to her. George met Richard's eyes and smirked. "This looks like a good place to stop for the night." The men were sailing homeward after a long day's fishing out at sea. They would usually have returned long before dusk, but a sudden storm had blown up, making the sea rough and stormy and the sailing slow and challenging. Their wives and children were waiting patiently for their return, but Richard, whose mind was lost to the words of passion dancing on the wind, only nodded in agreement. Any random thoughts of their families or caution were thrown aside as the men maneuvered the small sailing boat towards the shoreline and the perceived pleasures that lay thereupon. As they drew closer, the passionate words and lusty singing beckoned them closer. Alluring and heavy with promise, the sound acted like wine on the minds of the two men. Tying the boat to the old and rotting dock, they lurched onto land, literally drunk with desire. The woman continued to sing as the men shuffled towards her, grinning and gibbering with excitement and anticipation, completely unaware of the large kitchen knife hidden within the folds of her cloak. George reached her first, followed closely by an equally mesmerized Richard. Neither of them saw the knife come up, dull and undiscernible in the dim light. It flashed downward in a deadly arc. George screamed as the great knife slashed through his shoulder, its journey stopped by the grinding of metal on his rib bones. He collapsed forward onto his hands and knees, braying and slobbering with pain and fear. Richard watched dazed as the she-devil grasped the haft of the knife, wrenched it free, and swung it outwards and across his body. His eyes widened momentarily as his belly split open like a ripe melon, spilling out his dark and writhing guts. The singing abruptly stopped, and the laughing began as the woman, her unnaturally bright and hawk-like eyes reveling in the gushing blood, slashed George's throat, abruptly ending the awful noise. Silence descended as the river continued its slow and meandering movement towards the sea.